Já moc děkuji panu ministrovi za úvodní vystoupení a nyní mi dovolte, abych představil a něco málo řekl k hlavnímu řečníkovi dnešního semináře, panu Andreasu Schleicherovi. Já jsem už naznačil, že zde reprezentuje OECD a myslím, že Česká republika je, na to mohu říct, hrdým členem OECD. Mám za to, že OECD je jednou z těch mezinárodních organizací, které mají dneska už mnoha desítek let tradici, která má reálné přínosy pro své členské země a oblast vzdělávání si myslíme je toho zásadním dobrým příkladem, jakým způsobem OECD jako organizace může napomáhat členským zemím formovat, upravovat, směřovat, ale zejména zlepšovat národní politiku v oblasti vzdělávání. Já na začátek možná bych jenom připomněl, že je to měření výsledků vzdělávání v členských zemích, ať je to jednak velmi dobře známá PISA nebo PIAC jako novější projekt, ale zejména Education at Glance. Pak je to také porozumění, jakými způsoby se studenti učí a jak jsou učitelé vyučováni. To jsou projekty TALIS, ITEL nebo PISA Teacher Questionnaire, ale také nové nástroje a nové projekty, které v oblasti vzdělávání vznikají nebo se připravují. Zmínil bych možná jenom jeden týkající se spokojenosti učitelů, projekt Teachers Well-being for Teaching, který má zkoumat, jak spokojenost učitelů ovlivňuje jejich postup v kariéře, jejich výuku ve světě, akademické výsledky a tak dále. S tématem vzdělávání a OECD je mnoho let spojena zejména jedna osoba, kterou máme dneska tu čest teda přivítat v Praze, a to je pan ředitel direktorátu Andrease Schleichera, direktorátu pro oblast vzdělávání a dovednosti, který je také zvláštním poradcem pro vzdělávací politiku generálního tajemníka OECD. Dovolte mi je krátce také představit. Kromě mapování údajů a politik členských zemí dohlíží na program pro mezinárodní hodnocení studentů, to je ta PISA, kterou jsem ji zmínil, průzkum OECD ohledně dovedností dospělých osob PIAC, strategie dovedností OECD, mezinárodní průzkum vyučování a učení TALIS a v neposlední řadě dohlíží na program rozvoje, analýzy a vzájemného srovnávání výkonnosti vzdělávacích systémů INES. Předtím, než začal pracovat pro OECD, pracoval jako analytický ředitel v Mezinárodní asociaci pro hodnocení výsledků vzdělávání EIA. Vystudoval fyziku v Německu a v Austrálii získal titul za studium matematiky a statistiky. Je držitelem několika vyznamenání a ocenění, jménem získal cenu Theodora Heusse, která mu byla udělena jménem prvního prezidenta Spolkové republiky Německo za příkladnou demokratickou angažovanost a je čestným profesorem na univerzitě Heidelbergu. Připomněl bych dříve, než mu dám slovo, že je také autorem knihy Světová třída, jak budovat školský systém pro 21. století. A tady bych možná připomněl, že Amanda Ripley, autorka bestselleru o vzdělávacím systému Nejchytřejší děti, o této knize napsala, že kniha Světová třída by měla být povinnou četbou pro politiky, reformátory školství a kohokoliv, kdo chce mít představu o tom, jak se školy mají přizpůsobit modernímu věku. Pane Schleichere, máte slovo a ještě jednou vítejte v Praze.
First of all, my apologies for doing my presentation in English, but you've got the translation. Then I want to thank Minister Plaga for inviting me to what I feel is a very special moment in the Czech Republic, where teaching is not just becoming financially more attractive, but where there is great investment in making teaching intellectually more attractive. Everybody says the quality of education can never exceed the quality of teachers. No? That's easy to say, but then how do we pay our teachers compared with other highly skilled people? No? And would you like your own child to become a teacher, not somebody else's child, no? Rather than a lawyer or economist? What careers do we offer to our teachers? Do we attract the best and brightest minds into teaching? And not just those who choose a specific teacher education program and march through specific pathways. Those are the real questions, and we need to also take into account that we live in a rapidly changing world. And that's one of the things that we do at the OECD. We track the learning outcomes of education systems over time. And I want to start with science because I know attracting science teachers is particularly hard in your country and in actually many other countries as well. And we started this in the year 2006. 2006 is a very long time ago for many of us. Very hard to remember. It was the year before the iPhone was invented. Twitter was still a sound in those years. Now, the Amazon still a river. But when you actually think about education, the capacity of students to think like a scientist, not just to remember scientific facts and numbers, but to think like a scientist, not much change really in the Czech Republic and many other countries as well. And the world didn't stop in the year 2009. Remember, that was the year when maps became dynamic, Google Maps, and the cars became electric. Started to drive without a driver. But once again, the capacity of our education systems to respond to those changes has been very limited. The world is changing. Education is trying to catch up. And just think about the last 3 years, you know, robotics, cloud computing, biogenetics, big data, cloud computing, huge changes in the world around us. But once again, education is standing still. And I'm not just talking about the Czech Republic. That's almost a global trend in the industrialized world. No? There are very few exceptions to this. Now, you can look, for example, to a country like Poland. Who would have thought in 2006 that the poor cousin in Europe would catch up with the Czech Republic and many other countries? Consistently moving forward. Or we can look, you know, to Asia, Singapore moving from good to great, and some regions in China I can no longer put on this map here. You can no longer see them because they just keep moving forward. So it's hard. The majority of countries are not seeing the level of progress that we need to see, but some countries make it. And I think those are the countries that we should be looking to. Show us that change is possible, and that change has a lot to do with teaching. The first thing, of course, we think about is money, obviously. And you can see if you're a poor country, money makes a difference. But you know, and the Czech Republic is certainly not one of the countries that invests a lot in education. No? You're sort of a bit on the low end of this slide. And that has a lot to do with teacher pay. But actually, if you look to the right side, more money doesn't guarantee you better outcomes. It's actually one of the bitter lessons that we see, that actually beyond the point where the Czech Republic is investing, more money alone is not associated necessarily with better outcomes. It's about thinking very hard about how the investments should be made. And the same is true with time. You know, we looked at in PISA at the time that students spend in school, that's the blue bar, and the time that students spend learning out of school, that's the yellow bar, and you can see it varies hugely across countries. The United Arab Emirates wins that. No? Students spend 60 hours per week learning in school, out of school. When I look at Finland, it's only a little bit more than half than that, 35 hours. But when you look at productivity, you can see that in countries like Finland or Germany or Switzerland or Japan, students learn a lot in very little time. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little. So once again, it's not about having students spend more time in school. It's about improving the learning environments. And that has to do with the quality of teaching. Now, easy to say, really, really hard to do. Education is hard to change. The status quo has always many protectors, and sometimes, you know, we as parents are part of the problem, not part of the solution. We get very anxious when our children no longer learn things that were terribly important for us. And we get even more anxious when our children learn things that we did not learn. So parents try to hold things back. Teachers are sometimes more likely to teach how they were taught than how they were taught to teach. And as a Minister of Education, you can lose an election over education, but you never win one over education because it takes so much time to translate better ideas into better outcomes. Changing education is really, really hard. That's, I think, something that we need to keep in mind. There are huge asymmetries. Now, if we want to make change, we have to invest resources, time, effort now. And we're going to see the consequences much, much later. The winners of change are many, but the wins are small, and they often don't stand up for them. Parents are very happy when you improve their child's learning, but they're not going to go out on the street. But those who perceive themselves to be losing from this, they're going to be very, very vocal. Those kinds of dynamics are really, really hard to address. But we need to do this. And there are several things that we have seen across countries. The first is, it's very easy to sort people, and it's very hard to improve people. But the most advanced education systems have become very, very good in educating all children. The 10% most disadvantaged students in the province of Shanghai in China do better in mathematics than the 10% wealthiest students in the United States. That shows us poverty need not be destiny. Every student can succeed. If we do believe that every student can learn, and if we provide the condition for every student to learn well. Second challenge. In the past, it was easy to teach students something. Today, the test of truth is not do you remember something that you learn in school, but do you have the kind of compass and navigation tools to find your own way in a world that is increasingly complex, volatile, ambiguous. That makes teaching much, much harder. Teaching is no longer about routine cognitive skills. In fact, the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, are precisely the kind of things that are disappearing from our labor market. Because those things are also easy to digitize, to automate, to outsource. The future is with complex ways of thinking, complex ways of working. That makes teaching a very, very different profession. That also means the kind of industrial model to teaching. Everybody is educated in the same way, works in the same way, goes to the same conditions, progresses in the same way. That's the factory worker model that is no longer adequate in the times that we live. It's about creating diverse careers, interesting careers, intellectually attractive careers. And that is the challenge of our times. And that means, changing work organization from structures that are Tayloristic, hierarchical, to ones that are flat, collegiate, that are predicated on professional collaboration. One of the things that really strikes me about the Czech Republic is how little time teachers spend to work with each other, to engage with other schools. Teaching is very much an isolated profession. And that's something that is paramount to change in the profession. If you are a scientist, I'm a scientist by background, my background is physics, you know what your colleagues are doing, not just in your own country, anywhere in the world. You work with them, and you progress with them. You feel professional ownership. And I don't think we have that in the teaching profession. And that has also to do with accountability, which in the past was primarily vertically, you talk to your superior. In the future, is more lateral. You talk to your neighbor, you talk to the other school. You know how other schools are succeeding. Now, those are the kind of transitions I want to talk about today. And I start with the first one, moving from just educating a few well to having everybody succeed. And I'm coming once more, and it's the last time back to the PISA study. Now, one of the things that we did once is to order learning outcomes by decile of social background. And here you can see in the Dominican Republic, these are the poorest kids, the wealthiest kids, and you can see there's a huge performance gap. And many people say, well, that's normal. Children from wealthier background do well, and children from poor background don't do so well. No, what's the surprise? But actually, when you look at this across countries, you can see how different the picture looks in different education systems. Look, the poorest kids in Vietnam or Estonia do as well as the average child in the Czech Republic. Or, you know, the neighbor Hong Kong. Hong Kong has many poor kids, but they do well in school. I think those kind of data should encourage us to look harder how we can create the conditions for every child to succeed. And you can see that often reflected in the mindset of students. When we once asked students, what do you think makes you successful in mathematics? You had the majority of students in the Czech Republic saying, that's about talent. If I'm not born as a genius, I'm going to study something else. Message being teachers have told them, well, you know, you either can do this or you can't. Or the system, the society has told them that. Sorting them into different pathways. If you ask that same question to a student in Singapore or China, you have 9 out of 10 students who tell you, if I study really, really hard, I trust my teacher is going to help me and I'm going to be successful. And as you can see on the chart, they will succeed. That's the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And it takes the growth mindset to overcome social adversity. And it has to do with how we invest our resources. Look at this. In the Czech Republic, but most other OECD countries as well, we make classes smaller for students in disadvantage. And we make them bigger for students in wealthier communities. And you say, well, that's fantastic. That means we are providing equitable resources. We invest more teachers to the students who need it most. But that's just on the surface. If you scratch the surface, you find this. If you are in a disadvantaged community or in a rural community, you have the worst teachers, the less qualified teachers. If you are in a privileged school or community, you get the more qualified teachers. So yes, on the surface, we put more resources to the poor kids, but in reality, we put the less qualified teachers to the poor kids. And again, it's the quality of teachers, not the quantity of teachers, who influences the outcomes that we see. And that's hard to change. It's easy to say, I give you more money if you're a poor school. Or I give you more money if you're a rural school. It's very, very hard to make it intellectually attractive for the best teachers to go to the toughest environment. But we succeed in other areas. If you look to the Czech Republic, you know, your best surgeons in the hospitals, they don't want to do the standard operations. They want to do the most difficult operations. Because we support them well. We give them the conditions to succeed. We give them all the instruments and the support they need to do their job really well. And that's why the most able people do the most difficult tasks. And teaching, we don't invest so much in this. But there are exceptions to this. If you go to Vietnam, for example, you always find the best teachers in the most difficult schools. Why? They're not actually paid more, but they build interesting careers around challenges. If you're a vice principal in a high-performing school, and one day you say to yourself, I really would like to become a principal, the education ministry will tell them, that's a great aspiration. But you know, first help us turn around one of the lowest performing schools. Show that you can change them. And in the same way, they get the best teachers in the most difficult schools. And they advance in their careers. They have multiple stages in the careers of teachers. Something that I know the Czech Republic is debating, and which I personally believe is very, very important for success. To offer teachers genuine teacher careers. And that's how it works. In Vietnam or China, if you want to get into a higher stage of your career, it's not about serving longer. It's about being willing and able to change the conditions in one of the most difficult environments. Those are the countries that have reverted this chart. But it's difficult to do. Right? Let me come to what I believe is perhaps the toughest challenge. It's about changing the instructional paradigm. Getting from students just, remembering things to actually creating something. That's what the modern education system really is required to do. Let me just give you a few trends on this, global trends. First of all, we are seeing worldwide a rise in the middle class. More people become wealthy. And 9 out of 10 new entrants to the middle class are in 2 countries only, China and India. The future, you know, in a moment you can say in the Czech Republic, the smart kids, the wealthy kids, compete with people in Europe. The future is this. There are going to be a lot more wealthy people in the world. You can see that also in absolute. That's one trend. It's going to be harder, you know, for people to maintain. But it's also going to be more diversity in classrooms. One of the trends that we observe across the OECD is that the 10% wealthiest people in the OECD area now earn 10 times as much as the 10% lowest earners. That's also something that ends up on the doorsteps of classrooms. Teachers will find more and more diverse classrooms. That's one of the biggest challenges that teachers face. And this is not just about, you know, economic diversity. There are also more people on the move. And the global trends of migration make our classrooms also more diverse. And again, it's all ending up on the doorsteps of classrooms. Teachers face that kind of growing diversity of society and need to personalize learning and do whatever it takes to deal with this. Volatility, I like this chart, which comes from the financial world. No? We save less and spend more. No? And this can only work up to a point for individuals and for nations. That's also for me a symbolic kind of feature of the value we attribute to education. If you are in China, the poorest parents will spend their last money and the last time and effort in the education of their children. That's the future of their country. In Europe, we have already spent the money of the children for our own consumption. That's why we are so heavily indebted. The Czech Republic is actually much better positioned than many countries in Europe, but the trend is the same. We spend more, we save less. We put more on the present and less emphasis on the future, and that's actually why education features so poorly in public accounts. We spend things on many things. Public money is actually quite there, but education doesn't feature as prominently as other things. And then, you know, the elephant in the room is digitalization. We have now more broadband connections in the OECD area than there are people. And that's fueling the rise of artificial intelligence. And this is one of the trends when we come to teaching that we should really take to heart. Artificial intelligence pushes us to think much harder what makes us truly human. How do we complement the artificial intelligence of computers with the human qualities that actually allow us to enable this? I'm going to come back to this because I think it's really, really important. If you think about digitalization, it's been incredibly democratizing. Everybody can contribute, participate in society, and so on. But it's also concentrating power at a rate that we have never seen before. It's incredibly particularizing. The smallest voice can be heard everywhere. You post something on Twitter and everybody can follow you. But it's also incredibly homogenizing, squashing individuality, cultural uniqueness. The big questions of our time are not just, you know, knowledge. It's also about identity, getting lost in this digital world. Digitalization is incredibly empowering. You can see that nowhere better than right here in Prague. The people who change the world don't have a big industry, but they have big ideas. The entrepreneurs that are most successful here in Prague have the product before they have the money. That is so different from it used to be even 20 years ago. But technology can be also incredibly disempowering. When we trust our smartphones more than we trust ourselves. We follow the dictates of Google Maps rather than trust our sense of orientation. And I think that is also becoming real. And why do I say this? Because this is all about what teachers find in the classroom. And we find it in the world of work. You know, as I said already, routine tasks are disappearing, technology-intensive tasks are rising, and you put the trends together, and you can see the future of work is going to look very, very different from where we see this now. People need to be able to do different things than what they're able to do. And you can also see when we surveyed students that half of 15-year-olds in the Czech Republic say, I feel really, really bad if I'm not connected. And you can see the time that students spend online outside school has got real dimension. You talk about a couple of hours every day. The digital world is becoming the real world for many young people. And when you think about this, you know, again, 10 years ago, you got the world's knowledge at your fingertips as a student. The real world and the digital world became sort of integrated, and suddenly everybody got connected. But that has also made many things harder. When you think about, you know, as a teacher, teaching young people to read used to be very simple. Reading was about extracting knowledge from sources that somebody else had written for you. And when you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia, and you could trust the answer to be true. Today, you look up things on Google, and you find 100,000 answers to your question, and nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong, what's true and what is not true. This very construct of literacy has totally changed. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge, it's about constructing knowledge. As a teacher, you need to be able to teach young people to navigate ambiguity, manage complexity, not just to read the alphabet. And again, you know, while it's so easy to connect people, now that's the wonderful parts of the digital world, actually the students in your classrooms are talking more likely to people who think like them, who look like them, who work like them. Now that's what Facebook and all these devices do with us. It is much harder now for teachers to help students understand the diversity in classrooms. Those are the real challenges. At the OECD, we have tried to sort of build a framework around this, you know, the future of education and skills, the future of teaching. Knowledge will always remain important, but there is a significant shift from content knowledge to epistemic understanding. Mathematics is no longer about formulas and equations. They're in your smartphone. It's about thinking like a mathematician. It's not about calculating an exponential function. It's about understanding the nature of an exponential function. What does it really tell us? If we would really understand, you know, we would have sent 3,000 doctors to fight the Ebola crisis in Africa then, rather than 300. It's easy to calculate, hard to understand. It's about thinking like a scientist, not just about knowing lots of things about biology and chemistry, but can you design an experiment? Do you understand the difference between questions that are scientifically investigable and those are not? Thinking like an historian. History, yes, has something to do with names and places and so on, but it has more to do with thinking like an historian. Do you understand how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it developed, how it advanced, and sometimes how it unravels when the context changes? What does it mean for the times in which we live today? Thinking like an historian. Why do I say this? Because those things are much, much harder to teach than following a textbook which gives us mathematical, scientific, or historical content. Teaching is becoming much harder, and it doesn't end with knowledge. This skill dimension, the modern world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Google knows everything. The modern world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. And then the big question of attitudes and values. So we have looked at those things quite in detail. And when it comes to the instructional system to teaching, it means raising cognitive demand, ensuring that all students are actively engaged. Success is also about teaching fewer things at greater depth. We are very good in adding more and more things to our school systems and putting more and more things in the school curriculum. That's easy to do, and you make yourself very popular. It is actually really, really hard to take things away and to give teachers more space to teach fewer things at greater depth. But that is the thing that we see in the most successful education systems. Curriculum in Finland is 40 pages. In Shanghai, 50 pages. Teachers teach fewer things at greater depth. How do we remain true to the disciplines, but at the same time encourage interdisciplinary understanding? How do we focus on things that students can use in other contexts? And how do we remember that some things are caught, not taught? When it comes to values, social emotional skills, we know their importance, and they're much harder to
to build because they're not easily put in a textbook. So let me turn directly to the profession, what it means. In the past, we could tell teachers exactly what to teach and how to teach. In the future, we need to create much more greater ownership of professional practice. In one sense, you can say the Czech Republic is giving its schools more discretion on this than virtually any other country except the Netherlands. If you look at all of the decisions that an education system takes, this is the share of decisions that are taken at the school level. So it's more than 2/3 of the decision that principals and teachers could take in their classroom. And then, you know, compare that with other countries where this is just 10%. So on the one hand, you can say in the Czech Republic there's a lot of space for schools to shape their organization and learning environment. But that's not really what I mean by professional ownership. What I mean by professional ownership is strengthening public confidence in the profession. It's about trust in the profession. And that's easy to say, hard to do. No? You know? You trust your mother, but would you trust your mother to fly a 747? No? Trust has a lot with to do with professional competence. It has a lot to do with transparency in the education system, with openness, with professional collaboration. You generally trust people who you know. How do we actually help, you know, communities and teachers to engage? Professional preparation and learning. Yeah, you think about teacher education, but quite honestly, in many countries, teacher education can be more the problem than the solution of professionalization. In many of the highest performing education, actually the best education doesn't happen in a university for teachers. It happens in the school from the best teachers and the best school leaders. We work very, very close, and it happens on a lifelong, life-wide trajectory, not just before people get into teaching. It has to do with collective ownership of professional practice, and by that I mean that the good ideas don't come from the outside, but come from the inside of the profession. And it has to do with how do we design the profession. I give you an example. In the Czech Republic, teachers teach. Now that's what you expect them to do. But actually they have relatively little time to do other things than teaching. Much less time than in many other countries. Many other countries, teachers spend a much greater share of their time engaging in the development of professional practice and professional understanding and professional knowledge. They are not just recipients of professional knowledge and implementers of this, they are also the designers of professional practice. And I think that's very, very important. When we come to the intellectual attractiveness of the profession, that is very, very much important. And the OECD, you know, like everything, we try to score countries on that. No? So when we talk about teacher professionalism, of course it has to do with teacher knowledge. Knowledge about the subject that you teach. No? That's the first thing that your students figure out very, very quickly. Do you really have a deep passion for the subject that you teach them? But it doesn't end there. It's also about, you know, do you know how students actually learn that subject? And most importantly, do you know your students? Each and every of them. And that's again something, you know, in the Czech Republic, teachers teach a class, and that's sort of how the work of teachers is defined. Many of the highest performing education systems, teachers would spend more time out of the classroom with individual students where they actually really get to know them. I'm going to come back to this. The second dimension is professional autonomy. Now, teachers can make decisions about, you know, their work, designers of innovative practices. And the last thing is about collaborative culture in education. To what extent do teachers work with other teachers, are connected with other teachers? And you can see how countries come out on this. Now, when you actually score and rank them on this, you can see that very much a difference in this. If you look at the Czech Republic, yes, teacher professional autonomy, relatively high. Teachers have a lot of discretion. But on the teacher knowledge, they don't get such a great score. And it's not the disciplinary knowledge. The disciplinary knowledge is quite good. It's mostly the knowledge about the people they work with. But also the green bar is small. The collaborative culture. Teachers work too much in isolation in their classroom, so trying to solve difficult problems on themselves. And it's actually worse than how it looks. You know, when you look at the green bar, you think, well, it's still not sort of too small. But when you look at this in a little bit more detail, you see this. On the left side, you can see that Czech teachers do actually engage in exchange. They talk to other teachers, they share material, they share resources, and things like this. That is happening to some extent. But when you look at the deeper level of professional collaboration, things like classroom observation. Do I study how other teachers teach my class? Joint activities, collaborative professional development. Do I learn together with my colleagues in the school and professional learning communities and so on? These bars are really, really tiny. So you can say overall collaboration doesn't look so bad, but when it comes to the things that really, really matter, there is much to do on this. And that, you know, I'm going to come back to this, and then I want to also show you, you know, you can say, well, maybe it's not so important, but actually what our data show is the more teachers teach jointly as a team, the more they observe other teachers' classes and provide feedback, the more they engage in joint activities, the more they take part in professional collaboration, the greater their sense of ownership of the profession, their trust in their own abilities. This deep professional collaboration is very, very important to raise the status of the teaching profession. Let's look at this in the context of resources. You know, often things come back to spending money and resources. On the vertical axis, you see the student-staff ratio. The lower you are, the more generous you are in providing teachers to students. And you can see actually the Czech Republic is, I know there's a lot of issues around teacher shortages, but actually compared with other countries, you have more teachers for every 100 students than many other countries. On the horizontal axis, I show you something else, and that's the size of classes. And there you can see classes in the Czech Republic are smaller than they are on average across OECD countries. And I compare you here with China. On the vertical axis, China and the Czech Republic are exactly the same, or almost exactly the same. Quite generous with the number of teachers you spend for every 100 students. When it comes to class sizes, classes are small in the Czech Republic and very large in China. And I know you're not going to tell me, well, it's much better to have smaller classes. You know, parents like smaller classes, teachers like smaller classes, and it's a much better kind of nice environment. You can argue that, but actually it comes at a cost. If you don't spend more teachers but make your classes smaller, it means that teachers have less time to do other things than teaching, the kind of things that are so important. Teachers may be getting less well paid, that's also true. So the small classes in the Czech Republic actually have a high cost. If you are teaching a class in Shanghai in China, you only teach about 11 to 16 hours per week. You spend more, but you work actually 50 hours per week, more than a Czech teacher. You just spend a lot of time doing different things. You spend a lot of time with individual students and their parents. You spend a lot of time with your colleagues. You spend a lot of time on research. If you have an idea, if you're not happy in a Chinese classroom with what happens in your school, you can design an experiment. You can say, actually, go to the government, I think I can do things better. And they will tell you, okay, here's some money, try to show it. You actually conduct an experiment. And if at the end of the year, you'll find out actually your approach works better, the government will not, judge you on this, but they will tell you, okay, show us that it works in 10 other schools with other people in other places. You design a larger experiment. If you succeed, one day you become an experimental school and the system starts to listen to you. That's how people contribute. They also have a digital platform where teachers can share their lesson plans and projects and ideas. So if you develop a very innovative lesson, you can make it available to other teachers. And they combine that with reputational metrics. The more other teachers are going to download your lessons, use your lessons, criticize your lessons, improve your lessons, the more popular you become in the school system. And at the end of the school year, your principal will not only ask you, how well did you teach your own students, but what contribution did you make to the profession? How did you help other teachers grow in their profession? How do the people around you respect you? That's what encourages the level of professional collaboration. And it comes, through those resource allocations. It's not about spending more money. It's about thinking about what work organization will help teachers to become the most revered professionals. What career structures. Again, if you go in a Czech hospital, you'll not find that everybody works on the same kind of level. Now you find some nurses, you find some doctors, you find a chief surgeon, you find a multitude of different professions who collaborate together to help patients. That's what we see also in high-performing systems in education. Now, I know you will tell me, well, maybe smaller classes are not such a great idea when it comes to making teaching attractive and making the work of teaching effective, but teachers are happier in smaller classes, and parents are happier in smaller classes. We tested that. Of course, if I ask teachers, do you like a smaller class better or a bigger class, they would all probably tell me they like the smaller class. But I asked the question differently. I basically asked the teachers, how happy are you with your work? And then I looked at the size of the class they actually teach. And I couldn't find much of a relationship. No, actually, teacher job satisfaction didn't vary much by the size of the class teachers teach. And now you will ask me, well, if it's not the size of the class, what is it that makes teachers happy or satisfied with their job? And there is a very clear answer to this. Actually, the single biggest predictor for teacher job satisfaction is not the size of the class, not even the salary. It's the degree of professionalization. Remember, professional knowledge, professional autonomy, and the collaborative culture. Those three things together, bring the green bar up, makes you satisfied with your profession, with your work environment. Also, make you believe in yourself as a teacher, teacher self-efficacy. And interestingly, look at the left part. That is our single best predictor for how teachers perceive their own status in society. Think about this. The status of the teaching profession in society is not only a feature of society, it is also a feature of how the work of teachers themselves is organized. And that's something that is actually varying a lot across countries. Now, if you are in Singapore or Korea or in Finland, you can see that most teachers believe that their job is valued by society. They feel appreciated. And surprise, surprise, if you go to Finland, they get 8 applicants for everyone every post in teacher education. That's a dream in the Czech Republic. Everybody wants to become a teacher. And if you fail to get a place in a teacher education institution, you can still apply for law school or economics. That's something that is to do with this kind of data. And Finnish teachers are not particularly well paid. They're better paid than Czech teachers, that's not very difficult, but they're not particularly well paid compared to the OECD countries. So it's not about money, it's about those conditions that make teaching intellectually attractive. And the same is true for Singapore. Singapore is an amazing career that they offer you. If you become, a teacher, you often start with a bachelor only, but you'll spend a lot of time learning. Most teachers will make their master's and PhD while studying. Most teachers will do internships in either university or the government. Actually, the majority of teachers spends about 1 year in government to study policy. They are not just the recipients of policies, they are the contributors of policies. If you're a school principal in Finland, you spend 2/3 of your time in your school and 1/3